Welcome to the Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. I'm dedicated to helping you take control of your life. Together, we'll explore practical tips, expert advice, and inspiring stories to help you overcome obstacles and achieve your goals. Making small changes is possible and can lead to big results. Are you ready? Let's go do this.
I'm well, Sue. Thanks for having me today.
Hey, I'm glad you're here. So let's pretend we just met at a dinner party. Tell me about yourself.
So my name is Dave Vanderlaan. I am, as I like to say to people, a recovering attorney, a retired public servant, and a washed-up wedding singer. And I left the law almost exactly 2 years ago, as of this recording, to work with my wife on a functional medicine practice she started back in 2018 called Nourish House Calls. She's a nurse practitioner, a functional medicine specialist, and I am her chief operating officer, just kind of running the business end of things to free her up to do all of the clinical scientific stuff that I don't understand well enough to be a practitioner.
That's great. So how do you go from being a washed up wedding singer to attorney? And to be COO
It has been a
now.
long and winding road with, I guess, many twists and turns, is kind of repeating myself, but it has been a long and winding and twisting road then. So I am a musician by training and temperament. I grew up singing. My parents met each other singing the Apollo Chorus in downtown Chicago. So music's just in my blood. I went to college. I got a bachelor's degree in vocal performance. I thought I was going to be an opera singer. Turns out I was not blessed with a giant voice that way. I got a master's degree in arts administration and then went to work in the arts, had some other kind of office jobs along the way. But after a few years, right around the time I was about to get married, actually in 2000, I thought I would give music one last shot. I answered a Craigslist ad almost 20 years ago now for male vocalist wanted. I thought, sure, I'll go on an audition. This could be good for a couple of gigs here and there. It turns out that a glorified wedding band that had been operating since the 80s and is still a going concern today had their white male vocalist quit on them to start his own thing. And so they were looking for a new white guy. Enter this white guy. I auditioned, I got the job, and suddenly I was doing 75 to 90 gigs a year, mostly high-end weddings,
Wow.
bar and bat mitzvahs, but the real glamour gig, and they still do this today, I believe, they would fly us to Las Vegas in late December, and we would do the High Rollers party on New Year's Eve in the Bellagio's Grand Ballroom. That was a cool gig.
No way.
Would have been 4 times, I believe. Yeah. So people who gambled $1 million in the Bellagio that year, that was how they got invited to this. This is definitely a tangent, but it's a fun story.
No, I love cool stories. I mean, because small steps lead to big wins. So, but there's
Absolutely.
stories in between. So no, I find this fascinating, actually.
Most of the gigs we did, as you might imagine, the guy who owned the business, a man named Ken Arlen, who's a tremendous businessman, built this thing from nothing. He played sax in the band and would deal with the brides and the mothers of brides and wedding coordinators and stuff. We would get the party going and people would be dancing and having a good time. And lots of times he would be able to sell an extra hour or two. And so we would do these gigs when they're weddings until sometimes 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Not in Vegas though, because in Vegas, they don't make money if we keep singing. So the ball would drop and by 12:10, that room was empty because they wanted everybody back on the floor, drunk, happy, and gambling away what would be your or my life savings in a single hand.
Wow. Oh, that's cool. Well, it
Yeah,
was
early night for
night
us.
then for you
So we would get to go and hang out with whatever soap opera stars they had come and do some of the set pieces while we took a break. It was a really, really fun, weird way to spend a few nights of my life.
So how'd you go from singer then to attorney? Because there's to me, they're different ends of the spectrum.
Largely unrelated. That's very true. There is some overlap that we can talk about in a minute, but I'll tell you the logistics of it first. So I got that gig in September of 2006. And at the same time, I started working in a nonprofit in Chicago called New Moms. They do wonderful work. They work with pregnant and parenting homeless teenage mothers. I was managing volunteers for them. So I would work there part-time during the day, and sometimes even on a Saturday, I would take a group of volunteers through a homeless shelter, ripping up carpet, putting down flooring, go home, shower, slap on a tux, and go sing in a $500,000 wedding. It was made for some weird Saturdays. So that was kind of my life for a couple of years, the first couple of years of my marriage. But there wasn't a real family supporting living in there. I made all right money, but it wasn't life changing. I have a pet theory called singer shelf life, where at that point I was in my late-ish 20s, and it's okay to be up there dancing around and singing sexy back, but I'm 44 now. I would be a little less credible fronting a rock band, a dance band than I was 15, 20 years ago. So I picked my head up.
That's an astute observation in your
Yeah,
20s, to be honest with you, because you're not going to want to be rocking that when you're 60.
probably not. And it's very specific to singers too, because the instrumentalists in that band were a lot of them were guys in their 60s, and they could really play, but because your eye wasn't drawn to them, it was just it's a different calculus for somebody off to the side playing trombone or whatever, like my friend Russ Evans did very, very capably. So with all that in mind, I took a look around and said, what could I possibly do with my life that would increase my earning potential, that would align with some of the other skills that I have? And I thought, oh, I like to argue. I'm a smart guy. I like to read and write. I'll go to law school. And that was a fine choice at the time. It was a totally reasonable choice at the time. So I got a job at a medium-sized law firm, probably 100 or so when I was a summer associate there. Weeks before I started practicing law in earnest in 2011, they merged with a larger law firm out of Boston, and I started work for a 600 lawyer firm. Worked there for about 4 years before it merged again. That was not a particularly successful large law firm as large law firms go. So they were basically acquired by a firm called Lock Lord. And so I actually worked for 3 different law firms without ever changing jobs. And I worked for Lock Lord from 2015, the time of the merger, all the way through my retirement at the beginning of
All right, that's kind of cool. That's to go from like wedding singer to lawyer. In your bio that you sent me, you practiced law for 10 years, but it really wasn't something that you love to do. Talk about mindset around staying in something for a decade, but realizing that, you know what, it's not your passion there. It's something that you really didn't love. What was the driver? And then what prompted you to
Well, I'll
change?
say I've done more work on mindset in the last probably 4 years than I had done in the previous 40. So I can't speak a lot to the quality of my mindset as I was white knuckling my way through a legal career. And I'll say that the first few years of practicing law, I rather enjoyed it. It was a tremendous intellectual challenge. I got to solve really interesting problems. I got to work with super smart people. I got to read and write and think and argue and get paid for it, and that was fun. Now, I worked a lot. It was a large law firm, and so on an average day, I might leave the house at 7 a.m. and come back at 7 p.m. And right now it's February in Chicago, and that would mean leaving my house when it's dark and not getting out of my office until it was dark again. And you can imagine what that does to a person's psyche. Fast forward a few years in, as I was getting more senior and having more contact with clients and doing less project-based work on particular cases and really starting to think more holistically about them, I became more and more aware that I was being paid to take a side of an argument, whether I thought it was the right side or not. And not necessarily a moral issue. I wasn't violating any ethical canons. I wasn't going in and lying to a judge. But I could look objectively at the facts of the case and the law as applied to those facts. And I could determine, at least in my reasonable opinion, what I thought the just outcome was. And then I would look at which side was paying me, and I would go in and argue the other side, because that's just part of our adversary system of justice. And I recognize that that's a useful role in our justice system, but boy, it pricked my conscience. And so getting toward
I can see that.
2015 or so, I was already getting a little itchy about it, which led me, and this is really the first of the small steps we can talk about today. I thought I would like to do justice within the law. who really administers justice? Well, that's a judge. The judge is impartial. So how can I become a judge? And leaving aside federal judgeships that are appointed by the president, state judgeships are largely elected, and you largely come up through local politics. Sometimes you're appointed by other sitting judges. So I got involved in local politics, and that's kind of the public servant aspect from which I've retired. But the real small step here is that I noticed a local state court judge's salary was about half of what I was making as a mid-level law firm associate. And going back to my earlier ambition of family supporting living, I thought, how can I close this delta? How can I make sure that I can keep my family in the lifestyle to which we've grown accustomed and even grow it? And that's what led me to looking for things like passive income. And I had represented someone who had done some apartment investing and thought, oh, that's really interesting. What else is out there? And so I just did a real deep dive. This show is for public recording. So of course I didn't do any of that while I was sitting in my office. It was all during off hours, into how could I generate passive income for myself and my family, which led me to Bigger Pockets, which led me to Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Very typical story at this point for people on the show.
Just I would probably say about 90% of my guests, that's generally the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
That is the gateway drug into the circles we run in.
But you know what? It's timeless.
It absolutely does.
It works.
It absolutely does. It was a tremendous and useful mindset shift for me. And so while I was trying to get involved in local politics and really getting involved in local politics, I was also starting to look at multifamily deals and ended up partnering with a friend of mine from church. And we took down a 9-unit building in the south suburbs of Chicago. And if I can make one recommendation to your listeners, it's don't do the biggest real estate deal of your life 2 weeks before the world shuts down for a pandemic. And I'm grateful to Uncle Joe for pumping a lot of money into the economy, at least from the perspective of that deal. I've got some quibbles with it.
From a real estate perspective,
it was very useful.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure it was great from other perspectives, but we don't need to get into the politics of that. So that's really been my multifamily journey. I'm really focused on Nourish house calls.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, there's a lot of small steps in there. So let's talk about Nourish house calls and what your wife does. And actually, as I was poking around on the website, I came across the phrase functional medicine practice. And I had never heard that term before. So talk a little bit about that. When did it start? Why you guys started it? And
absolutely. So let's talk generally first about what functional medicine is. So functional medicine can be compared to what we might call traditional Western medicine or conventional medicine. So the example I like to give is if you have high blood pressure and you go see your traditional primary care provider, you'll have an appointment that lasts about 7 minutes. You may get a question or two in, but mostly it's just going to be a quick checkup. This doctor discovers you have high blood pressure and will prescribe you a pill that you can take for the rest of your life to artificially lower your blood pressure with no inquiry into what gave you high blood pressure in the first place. Functional medicine takes a lot more time. Joya's initial appointment with a patient lasts an hour and a half. Follow-up appointments last an hour. And the whole thrust of functional medicine is root cause analysis. So why do you have high blood pressure? What's going on with your diet, with your lifestyle, with your sleep, with your stress management, kind of looking at all aspects of your life to find out what's not working well, what's not functioning well, and restoring it to function so that your body can heal itself. And Joy, as a nurse practitioner, can prescribe a chemical pill that can help in the meantime. But over time, as your body gets well, you won't need the chemical prescription anymore because your body is functioning properly and you won't have high blood pressure. That's one example of the difference between a functional medicine approach as opposed to a conventional medicine approach. The other really interesting difference is in conventional medicine, doctors tend to be hyper specialized. And the outcome of that is they tend to look at particular systems of the body in isolation. So you've got a brain guy and a lung girl and another heart guy. And they sometimes will communicate with each other, but more often someone will look at a heart problem and say, what's the heart solution? Or look at a brain problem and say, what's the brain solution? Functional medicine does a better job, in my opinion, of looking at the body as a whole and looking at the interaction between the systems of the body, because ultimately the way your gut functions, your smaller and lower, your small and large intestine, have a dramatic effect on many, many, many other systems in your body. And your primary care physician may not be well trained in that, may not have the time to take a look at those interactions, or maybe so specialized that it's just not something that he or she is thinking about. Whereas a functional medicine provider, that's really they are trained and interested in looking at all of those interactions.
Okay. Yeah. As you're talking about that, I'm thinking of the
Yeah,
word
holistic medicine
holistic.
isn't.
Is
That's
that
that's
kind of the
another word that
same?
gets
Yeah.
thrown around in this space. I think it applies quite well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just taking like the whole body approach as opposed to just looking at one particular area. Yeah. It makes sense. Yeah. It makes sense. Does she treat
She does not
homeopathically?
do homeopathics. We've used that in our own home, but that's not a part of her practice. No, it's all kind of alternative if you're looking at alternatives to traditional medicine.
Hmm.
But I think functional medicine probably hews a little bit closer to a traditional medicine approach than what you might consider holistic, which I don't want to use a pejorative term because I think it really helps a lot of people, but it tends to be, let's say, a little further afield.
Hmm. Okay. All right. Where does your wife practice?
We are based in Westmont, Illinois, which is where we live. I am sitting in our bedroom office right now. This is where Joya does a lot of her work, that and our dining room table and our family room couch. It is primarily a house call practice. So she'll drive within about a 10-mile radius of our home to visit people in their house, their office. Sometimes people have rented a hotel room so they can get whatever treatment they need. We also do rent office space from a local chiropractor about a day and a half a week. This is a Tuesday afternoon. That's where Joya is right now seeing patients. And then we do virtual visits as well. So Joya is licensed in Illinois. She can see patients throughout Illinois. She's also licensed in Florida, New Hampshire, and Vermont. And we're working on Washington, Oregon, California, Arizona, Texas, and Pennsylvania. And I think some of those will hit by the end of Q1 in 2024, and we should have all 6 by halfway through this year. I'm very
Oh,
excited
wow.
about it.
That's exciting. That's expansion right there. So
Thank you.
congratulations. I'm excited about that for you, especially California. For her to be licensed in those states, what kind of process is that for
What
them,
we've learned is
for
it
you?
is quite different state to state. So broad strokes, she needs to get licensed as an RN in the state first. And then from there, she can apply for licensure as an advanced practice registered nurse, which is really just an equivalent term for nurse practitioner. Some really interesting differences, though, in the speed with which states process these applications, in some of the hurdles that we need to jump through. And I think it's all well-meaning, right? They want to make sure that whoever gets licensed is capable and well-trained and will do far more good than harm to the citizens of that state. So I'm not begrudging any of the bureaucrats there. I do wish some people would move a little faster, but I'm sure they have a backlog. One really interesting difference, though, is about half the states in the union, including Illinois, allow nurse practitioners to practice independently, which means Joya can have her own practice in those states. She can see patients without necessarily having any sort of formalized relationship with a medical doctor. The other half of the states in the union, and this does include California, Texas, and Pennsylvania, are not independent practice states. So Joya will need to establish what some states call a collaborative relationships, what other states call a supervisory
Mhm.
relationship, meaning she'll be supervised by a medical doctor. And so we're in conversation with folks about making those arrangements as well, so that we can really hit the ground running once she's licensed in those states.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice. What's some of the greatest joys that have come out of the business that she's built and that you help her run?
They are myriad, Sue. It really is wonderful for her, first of all, to change people's lives. One of the patient populations she works with a lot are women who are in perimenopause or in menopause, postmenopause, who are dealing with a lot of what we might think of as typical menopause symptoms. low libido, poor sleep, low energy, brain fog, that sort of thing. And they go to their primary or their OBGYN and they say, that's menopause for you. Here's an antidepressant and a sleeping pill. Joya can offer a lot more help to women like that. And it's not just that. She sees other patients too. But within this example, she does a lot of bioidentical hormone therapy, hormone replacement therapy. And that just gets these women feeling like themselves again. And they are overjoyed that, first of all, they feel heard, right? Because they can come in and they can describe these symptoms and they have an empathetic ear. And that's a lot of healing starts there, to be quite honest. And once they get these treatments in concert with all the other things that Joya can recommend and prescribe, they feel wonderful. And it dramatically changes the quality of their lives. And so that's a great joy for my wife to be creating this life change, helping people get healthier, feeling like themselves again, improve their relationships, both romantic and non-romantic. It's an incredible thing for her to be able to create for people, obviously in concert with a lot of other pieces, and even co-laboring with the patient. And that's a joy for me as well, albeit one step removed. And I'll give you one other story. Functional medicine involves pretty specialized testing, a lot of which you might not necessarily get from your traditional provider. Some of that is cancer screening, or at least related to that. And there's a recent story, I think, it was probably in the middle of 2023, where Joya caught early on a very aggressive form of cancer in a patient that the primary would not have tested for until perhaps it was past the point of no return. And to quite literally save someone's life, that's one of the stories we tell around our practice, even though it's really just Joya and me and vendors and a 1099 nurse. That's what we do. We help change people's lives. We help save people's lives. That's massively important to me. And one of my joys, I really am getting to the point here, is that that's a whole lot better than making an argument I don't believe in so that a corporation can have slightly more money than it did before. So I am directly participating in improving, changing, saving people's lives. What more joy could there be than that? And I get to support my wife, who is a beautiful genius woman. Sue, you've met her. She's the greatest. For me to support her genius, to, as I like to say, introduce more of the world to her and what she does so that more of the world can get healthy, that's incredibly satisfying for me. I really, really love doing that.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, wow, that's great. I mean, it just, when you fall into something that you love to do and that's in your zone of genius and at your core, then, it feels like, does it feel like to you that life falls into place and it doesn't really, even when the hard stuff comes, it's not, it's still easy. Does that make sense? Like the challenges, like when you guys face challenges, how do you approach them and how do you help each other and work together? And if you have an example, that'd be
So I
great.
generally agree with you that working within your zone of genius makes the hard easier. I think it's worth pointing out that the hard still exists. There are days when this job feels like work. There are days when we struggle or we haven't hit the revenue that we were looking for, or an idea we had doesn't quite work out the way we thought. And that certainly happened plenty over the last couple of years. That it's not all warm and fuzzy in this business. But how do we help support each other through it? I think part of it is we've been married a relatively long time. It's over 17 years now, long before we ever worked together, long before Joya even started the business. So we have a long track record of pleasant and positive and uplifting communication with one another. And boy, does that make it easier when there are blips on the radar, whether that's a business problem or a problem that I created within the business, or if I didn't communicate with Joya with the grace that I wanted to show, or vice versa. We recognize that as an aberration, and we can with relative speed get back to supportive, encouraging communication with one another. And once we're there, it's not that the problem solves itself. That's too simple. But we're both very smart people. We're both dedicated to one another and to the business and to our ultimate goals of growth and helping more and more patients. And with that in mind, there's always a solution to whatever problem there is. And we can find it together because, like I said, we're
Yeah.
both capable human beings.
I love that. What are some small steps that you guys take in the area of communication to help each other when something does go awry?
One small step is if things get a little bit heated, and they rarely get past a little bit heated in my marriage, thank God, we just take space from each other. Not every issue needs to be discussed the moment it arises. And we're both proactive about saying, let's revisit this in 5 minutes, or let's revisit this in 45 minutes. There's always the understanding that we're going to come back and we're going to talk about it. If we both gotten back to a relative baseline of emotional stability, it's a lot easier to walk through it. I don't know how small that step is. It's been pretty big in our marriage.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty big. As you were talking, I was
Yeah.
thinking of awareness. You have to have that awareness to pause, stop, and then actually be aware that the two of you have to take that step back and say, okay, we know this could go bad fast, but we don't want it to go there. So it's almost like a timeout. I'm going to that corner. You're going to that corner. We understand we're not going to ignore the problem. We're just going to sit in quiet for a little bit. I wonder how many heated arguments and conversations could have been avoided if two people just stepped in another room for, like you said, like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, however, whatever
I,
distance they needed, and then said, okay, we can come back together. So I think that's really important that you were talking about, but you don't have to hash it out
yeah,
right that
I
second.
think the answer is a lot. A material number of those heated arguments could be avoided by taking a timeout. And I feel like that awareness is a lot easier for me in my 40s than it was in my early 30s and 20s, and God only knows what lack of emotional awareness I had in my teens. It was substantial. So I'm growing into it. It gets easier for people who are young, who aren't there, or who feel like they aren't there yet in their own relationship. It's possible I didn't always approach things this way. I still don't always approach it perfectly this way by any stretch. This is an area in which any human being can improve.
Yeah. Yeah. What's something you do for yourself to help you improve 1% each day?
A few things. The first thing that comes to mind. So I'm a Christian. This is a Christian household. I spend time reading the Bible and I spend time in prayer. That connection with my Creator allows for that sort of improvement. One of the things I'm really working on right now is stress management, especially stress management around parenting. And we have a wonderful toy called Brain Tap. I don't know if you're familiar with Brain Tap at all. It's a headset with a visor, and I call it a guided meditation on steroids. There's an app involved too. You plug it into your phone, and you can have two voices talking to you at once, while there's light therapy going into your ear canal, and there's light therapy going into your eyes, and there's binaural beats playing in the headphones as well. I used it earlier today for 20 minutes. I have it on in my goals to be doing that about 5 days a week. I probably could do it 7 or even multiple times a day. I am never more relaxed in my human existence than 3/4 of the way through a brain tap. It feels like my whole body is just sinking into my bed. And when I'm
Wow.
done with a session, most of them last about 20 minutes. I feel incredible. And that is what is right now
Wow. Okay.
spurring that at least 1% improvement in my emotional awareness, like we talked about before, but also just ability to self-regulate on a daily basis.
Okay. Yeah. So do you do like a meditation practice too, or breathing? Do you incorporate any of that
Not
into what you
meditation
do?
as such. I had played with that as a younger person. I do think it's really valuable. It's just not something I incorporate right now. Breathing is something I do some consciously and some unconsciously. Sometimes I'll slip into a breathing technique and Joy will just turn to me and say, "Are you all right?" Yeah, I'm just calming down, just regulating. I don't know if you're familiar with a woman named Amy Novotny. She's a physical therapist by training, I believe, but she has what she calls the PABR Institute, and I cannot quite remember what PABR stands for. But she changed my life a few years ago. I had had some significant shoulder
Mm.
problems, and physical therapy wasn't doing it for me. I was really in a lot of discomfort. I knew her through another mastermind group and started working with her, and she taught me how to breathe. She taught me how to stand, and it is
Mhm.
we don't need to go through the whole technique right now, but just in short, rather than sucking in air through your nose, you open up a vacuum and let the air go in passively. Kind of think about it going in through the toward the back of your head and then down into your lungs, and then you blow out through a
Mm.
tight ooh. And when you breathe in, you're trying not to raise your ribs, like leave your ribs down, and then as you are breathing out, have your rib cage collapse down and in. And if I do 10 of those breaths, I feel tremendous. That's another really great reset for
Wow.
me. Another emotional regulation tool that now that we're talking about it, I need to do that a lot more like daily than I have been.
I just learned about the
Yeah.
Wim Hof method of breathing. Basically, his breathing method is you lay on a couch or in bed. So you're just laying there and you take 30 deep breaths. And had been playing around with breath work for the last couple of months, but I've never done 30 in a row. And it took about 7 or 8 minutes. By the time I was done, I felt like I had melted into the bed I was laying on. And it put me into that state of I literally just fell right to sleep. It was almost meditative in a way, but you're just focusing on your breath and your breathing. And if anything came into your brain, it just, you're just like, oh yeah, okay, great. And then you just let it float back out again.
Yeah, the Wim Hof stuff is very, very cool. And it goes in with cold
Yeah.
exposure. I know I've never really tried to pair those two,
Hmm.
but I agree with you. When I've done it, and it's been very infrequent in my life, I have left it feeling like,
Yeah.
oh, this took me 5 minutes. It feels like I'm leaving 20 minutes of meditation. And as someone who strives for efficiency in a lot of areas of my life, I really appreciated that.
Well, I'll tell you, it's now that you mentioned about the efficiency and the cold. So I'm the type of person where I will verify first and then I'll trust, right? So I have to have the science to back up something. And I had heard about Wim Hof before and the cold plunges. People we hang out with, a number of them, they swear by cold therapy and they do their cold plunges and jump into cold lakes and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, I don't know. And I would take a cold shower every once in a while. I'm like, oh, yeah, that felt good. But boy, that was pretty cold. And so there was no real reason why I should do this until I listened yesterday. There's a guy by the name of Brian Johnson. He has an app called Heroic. And in it, he has what's called Philosopher's Notes. And he has read over 650 books and then outlined all of these books. And there's science that goes behind them. So he picked apart the Wim Hof method and then referenced the science behind taking cold showers. And I went, oh my gosh, there's the evidence that I needed to know that a cold shower is worth taking in my body. So I tried it this morning and it was only 15 seconds. I counted to 15 and I came out. I'm like, wow, that was pretty good. I'm looking forward to doing it tomorrow. I mean, it left me in such a cool state. I didn't realize how beneficial it could be. So I'm giving myself a 30-day challenge.
Well, that's great. So I'm curious. I'm glad you found that resource. I'm curious, how long did you feel the effects afterwards? And some people feel mental clarity, some people feel exhilarated. Did that last you for a long time after your shower?
It did for a little bit. I came out of that. The physical effects, if I really tuned into it, I mean, at first it was phenomenal. Like you turned off the water and I went, wow, this feels really good. It probably lasted a good half an hour. They say that if you take a cold shower about 2 hours prior to bed, it will also calm you down and give you a better night's sleep. And from what I heard, don't do it right before you go to bed. That's a no-no, but 2 hours to an hour and a half before you go to sleep to take that cold shower is also just as effective as taking it in the morning. But the main thrust out of the research that Brian was referencing is that it decreases inflammation in the body. It helps with weight loss. It regulates breathing. It lowers your resting heart rate. I mean, the benefits that science found out of it, and it wasn't anything long. I mean, you're supposed to get up to 2 minutes in a cold shower. Now, Wim Hof himself, he ran barefoot on cold snow and Mount Kilimanjaro for a half an hour, something on something like that. I mean, here's the fascinating thing that I'm learning from all of these people. Like you take somebody like Wim Hof, or you even take somebody like Elon Musk or any of those guys, and we step back and we look at it and we're like, oh, well, that's them. We can't do that. But the truth is that all of us within us have potential to accomplish great things that are just as great as those. It's unlocking that part of the brain and believing in yourself. And then, of course, there's a lot of other things behind it as well. But all of us, the point is that all of us have that latent potential within us to accomplish those really cool goals if we really put our minds to them
Yeah,
and set
I
out to.
tend to agree with that, and it's one of the things that I appreciate about someone like Wim Hof, or I just finished Colin O'Brady's book, The 12-Hour Walk. He spoke at a GoBundance event recently, and I would not set out to run barefoot across Kilimanjaro for a half hour, or like Colin did, walk from
Yeah, me
one
neither.
end of Antarctica to the other end of Antarctica over the course of a month and a half, or climb the 7 highest peaks in the world and visit both poles over the course of something like 129 days. All of that seems patently insane to me, but you're
Yeah.
right. The inspiration there is not go out and do all of these things that might kill most people. It's expanding our idea of what human beings can do. And now that window has shifted or expanded, boy, I can push my own boundaries a lot farther than I've felt comfortable doing before. So I really appreciate their inspiration, even if what I
Right.
think they're doing from moment to moment is something that I would choose to not inflict on myself.
Like I have a friend of mine, a really nice guy, his name's Steve Leach, and his mission is to swim all the major channels in the world. So he already swam the Kauai
Wow.
Channel, 26 miles. It's an amazing story. And when I talk to him, and when you talk to some of these guys who do these things, it's not the feat themselves I find fascinating. It's
Mhm.
asking them the why behind it and what drives them. And I think that all of us have that within us, that we can accomplish whatever it is. If we have the big enough why behind why we're doing what we're doing, then we can pretty much accomplish whatever we set our minds out to. The how it's supposed to be done and the who, if you have the right kind of why and put out the right vibrational frequency, I truly believe the who's and the hows will appear if your why is
I
big
think
enough.
that's right. I think it might be a little incomplete because I can imagine a person
Okay.
with a really compelling why who shouts that why into the universe and then goes and grabs a bag of potato chips and sits on the couch and watches, season
Oh, well.
17 of The Bachelor, end to end to end. And I don't know that the how and the who are necessarily going to appear to that person.
Well, I don't think you're putting out the right kind of vibrational frequency either. I mean, you're sitting on the couch. That's pretty low vibrational frequency. Now, I'm
Okay.
kind of a law of attraction person. I've been learning more about how we are all created. I also believe God is the creator. He's created everything. If somebody wants to believe different, that's fine. A universe, whatever. But the science behind it is that we all are created in energy. We are energy beings. I mean, that's just, you can go to the science, they show it. We put off energy, and the way you feel, we put off certain vibrational frequencies. Right now I'm pretty excited and I'm enjoying what I'm doing and I'm smiling, and you are too. And we're enjoying this conversation. You're
Mhm.
putting off a high, vibrational frequency versus if I came to you and I'm like, very depressed or
Yeah.
fearful or anxious or not enjoying what I'm doing right now, it puts off a low vibrational frequency. And I truly believe that when you operate at that high level and you put that out there and people pick up on that, at some point that's going to manifest itself.
Yeah.
People will appear. If I'm just sitting on the couch eating potato chips, watching TV, then yeah, you're putting off low vibrational frequency and not a whole lot is going to, I believe anyway, not a whole lot is going to appear to you. And I mean, you're right. I agree 100%. You've got to do something as well. You can't just sit there.
In terms of doing the work. And I think that action
Yeah.
can create that sort of energy, right? The more you run in the direction of the why, that can improve your attitude, improve your frequency if that's your preferred framework. And then you're right, more people will see that, say, hey, what's that guy all about? What's that woman doing? She really seems to be passionate about all the work she's doing. How can I be in the Sue Saller business? Right. And once you get that momentum going, however you choose to frame it, I agree with you. You're definitely putting yourself in a better position to find the hows and the who's at that point.
Yeah, they'll show up. What was something that you thought would be hard about no longer practicing law? Turned out it really wasn't, and then flip it as well. What's one thing that you thought would be easy and then turned out being more challenging than you thought?
What did I think would be hard? I thought finding the money would be, if not hard, maybe more challenging than it had been. I'll tell you a story around that. So we both know the great Jamie Gruber. In October of 2021, I had lunch with him, and I was belly aching about my job and talking about the businesses that Joya and I were building, and thinking about, did I want to leave a law firm and maybe go in house, at least practice law in a way that wasn't quite so trying on my time. And he really helped me reframe, asking me how much money I had saved up, what was my runway, about 6 months. What could I do for our businesses if I took 6 months off? A hell of a lot. If everything went to zero, what would be the worst case scenario? I could go back and get a job at my old firm or some comparable law firm. All right, so take 6 months off then. So I went home and I pitched this to Joya, who was slightly less receptive to this than I had been when I had lunch with Jamie, where I was an immediate yes. And she said, why don't you give me until Thanksgiving? And then we went on an anniversary trip in early November of that year, and we were sitting at dinner, and she gave me the green light, and I started crying, and it was beautiful. But I was prepared to work my tail off in this business, and like I was willing to let things go to zero, or at least trickle towards zero, before I went back and tried to get another W-2 before I went back to practicing law. And so I left, maybe not thinking it would be hard to make enough money in this business, but certainly willing to endure failure if that's what it took to find out. Then in December of 2021, while I was still in the law firm, because I was going to wait for the end of the year to see what my bonus was going to be and get that before giving my notice, in that month, Nourish House Called had the best year the business ever had in that 1 month.
Wow.
And then I was told that I was going to be getting a bonus over 6 figures. That was the largest bonus I had ever received as a lawyer. And it dramatically increased our runway, and it gave us some flexibility to try some things, some of which have worked, some of which really didn't. But we had a lot more play in the joints to figure out how to grow this business. And so that made it easier. When I thought I might have to do a little, teeth gritting at the beginning of this. And we've been really blessed that the business has grown nicely. We launched a membership model in late 2022, and that's grown. We were around 75. I'm hoping to double that this year. I'm confident we will. We just rolled out a new longevity program that I'm super excited about, that when that hits can really change people's lives in a different way and also have a real dramatic effect on the growth of our business. So that's all trending in a really positive direction. That's taking a lot of work. But again, we are operating at a very high frequency. We are approaching this business with enthusiasm, and I think that helps. So that has been, if not strictly easy, certainly easier than I may have anticipated when I was thinking about leaving the law. So the second question is, what did I think would be easy that has proven to be difficult? I thought I was going to nail the balance between being business partners and being spouses. And we've done a good job some months. And other times, the chief operating officer of Nourish House Calls has allowed the business to take on too many big projects at once. And that has put a bit of a crimp in his marriage, because we've both been up working sometimes past midnight. And there are seasons in every business that require that, especially a small business that's growing. I
Right.
get that. But that's one thing that I think we're in a season right now where we've been incredibly busy. The website you were looking at, we just launched that within the last couple of weeks.
Hmm.
We
Yeah.
just created a budget for the first time in the history of this business. And we just did IVs at the GoBundance event in Vermont. We just came out with this new longevity membership, the Executive Longevity Blueprint. And so doing all four of those things at once was probably foolish on my part because it just put way too much on both of our plates. I've pushed Joya closer to burnout than I should have. One, as a business person, because I don't want my person who's running all the operations to throw up her hands and quit. Also as a husband,
You're
right?
right.
It has been something of a strain on our relationship because we have not taken as much time as we should to pour into each other without talking about the business. And so that's one adjustment. How do we set appropriate boundaries around business time so that we protect spouse time? A part of that is also I've really got to hire another nurse practitioner. That's coming in the first half of this year. I was researching how does a smart person use AI as a quasi employee to help with hiring. So I've not come to any reasonable conclusions on that yet. I'm still doing that work, but that was my day.
Oh, wow. If you could go back in time to your younger self and deliver a message, what would it be?
I got two for you, if you'll indulge me too. The first is relax, man. Just relax. I was wound so tight as a boy and as a younger man. I'm still not a great relaxer. Nothing is as important as we make it seem in the moment. And that's something I am still internalizing. It's something I'm really looking forward to doing better a year, 5 years, 10 years from now than I do right now. Just based on the trajectory I've had in the last 20, I'm excited about what that will look like. But I would love to to teach even this level of relative relaxation to myself at 24 or 17. Man, my life would have been a lot easier. It would have been a lot happier. The other thing I would do, and this is very practical, is I'd go back to myself as a teenager and teach them about delayed onset muscle soreness. I love lifting weights, but the first time I ever tried to lift weights, my father loved it. He's a weightlifting guy. I went with him as an early teenager and we lifted, and I woke up the next morning and I did not understand what was happening. And I walked into my parents' bedroom. I looked my father dead in the eye and said, "Fix my chest." And he probably knew, but he didn't articulate in a way that at least I could remember and appreciate and understand what was happening, and that this was a good thing, and that it just means that you're working well. And the more you do it, the less that's going to happen. I wish I could teach all the good that resistance training does for the human body, and just to deal with that discomfort. There's a lot of good lessons in there too, right?
And it's like, oh, this is a normal kind of pain. Yeah, you just don't realize it that actually that discomfort is
Yep,
where the growth happens, and that's a good thing. And isn't that a great metaphor for life as well? You know, the growth happens in the area of discomfort that we're feeling, but when that discomfort dissipates, the growth has occurred, and then you're in a better place
absolutely.
than where you were
And even
before.
even more than that, if I
So,
can push the metaphor a little bit, to learn to go through that discomfort earlier in life when you have all the time in the world, but just more sitting around time. Like, how much time did you really have when you were in high school and college compared to now in your life? You had hours a day. And I so deeply admire the young people who get it. And for those of us who didn't and are here now, there's also something to be said for giving yourself grace. And you've got a lot left in your life to improve and grow and run after your dreams and expand your boundaries and all that stuff. So
regardless of how old you are, you can do it at any age. And, I think that's one thing I have to remind myself as I go through
yeah,
transitional changes in life as well. It's okay, number one. And number two, you have longer than you think. And it goes back to that quote. We overestimate what we think we can accomplish in a year, but we underestimate what we can get
absolutely.
done in 5. So
Absolutely true.
think about that. Yeah, yeah. What's something that very few people would agree with you on?
No, I love this, and I saw this in the run sheet, and so I'm glad I had a chance to think about it because I have what I think is a good answer. Now we need to parse a little bit. We'll do some lawyer stuff here because I'm taking most people not as most of humanity, but most people that I think are inclined to listen to the Small Steps Big Wins podcast. So people in the into personal development, right? So here's my perspective. You can learn every bit as much from reading fiction as you can from reading nonfiction if you read the right books. There's so many people. And I don't know everybody in personal development circles, obviously, but the impression I get is people take great pride in mainlining personal development nonfiction books. Now, I'm going to read 50 books this year, and it's great because many of those books should be 2,000 word internet articles anyway. You can learn a lot by reading Dostoevsky and engaging with, Raskolnikov's approach to life and the great man theory. There are wonderful works of fiction that present ideas in narrative fashion that you kind of need a different part of your brain to engage with because our brains are wired for stories, and the best nonfiction books are organized around stories as well. What they do though is they explicitly say, here's the point of the stories I was just telling you, here's the lesson to learn. And it's good to be spoon-fed those lessons. Sometimes you just want to be told what to do, but there's real value, I think, in wrestling with fiction and trying to suss out what's the author's perspective here? What does the author want to communicate through these characters? What is this character's perspective? Does this character agree with the author? Do I agree with this character? What would I do in this situation? What can I learn through these stories, either through positive or negative examples that can really enhance my quality of life? I love doing that stuff. I find it really, really fun. And I encourage your listeners and everybody else whose goal is to read as many nonfiction personal development books as possible. That's great. Keep doing that. Mix in some excellent fiction and you'll light up your brain in a different way.
Yeah, I agree. I was
Hmm,
thinking of The Alchemist. Yeah, I haven't read it in a while. My daughter had handed it to me a couple of
nice.
years ago and said, "Here, mom, read this." But it didn't become more real to me until the last, I would say, 6 or 7 months. And I love the word alchemist. I find the English language fascinating, and I would think you would too, because words have meanings, and you have to make sure that the word that you use has the correct meaning, and the person that you're speaking to also understands your definition of that word and how you use it. Once you start getting into the weeds on that, you realize how many of our disagreements happens because we don't understand or we didn't fully grasp the correct definition of the words that we were using. So I went off on a tangent there. I started talking about alchemist. Alchemist is somebody who just creates out of nothing. They create something out of nothing. And I love that. Couple that with the word abracadabra with my words I create. Those are just two. I absolutely
Hmm.
love that word abracadabra. We can create the lives that we want with our words if we are in tune to that enough. And then you couple that with the alchemist, where you create something out of nothing.
And you're exactly right. Words were my tools for a long
Yeah.
time. To a certain extent, they still are. And I can't tell you how many times in my personal and professional life I've said, let's take a step back and define our terms. It's a really useful way to think about it. And you're right, you can solve a lot of disagreements, not just with your timeouts, but also by making sure we all know what the words we're using mean.
Well, as we wrap up, because I want to be mindful of your time, there are questions I like to make sure I get to and ask everybody. So let's jump into those. What's one question or topic you wish I would have asked about, and how would you have answered the question or expanded on the topic? That's a dangerous question for somebody who used to be a lawyer.
It
I don't
is. Oh
even know if
well,
I should ask you that.
there are many areas we could talk about, but I'll go back to something we.
But we can save for
Sure,
another
yeah. Let's do
podcast
round
too.
two. Just Dave
Yeah.
talks extemporaneously for 75 minutes. That's a dangerous invitation.
I like it.
Going
Sounds
back
good.
to wedding singing. There were real lessons that came out. Oh, you know what? Let's talk about this because you had asked, and we never really got back around to it, about the differences between being a wedding singer and an attorney, but I want to talk about what I learned from that experience that made me a better attorney, that now makes me a better and business builder and even podcast guest. So when I was in college, like I said, I got my degree in vocal performance. I had terrible stage fright. I did a junior and senior recital, and I was almost in a panic before going out on stage. My heart rate was rapid. My breathing was shallow. I did not perform as effectively as I could have because I was just so scared of being in front of people. But boy, nothing beats stage fright out of you like reps. And I got all sorts of reps in the wedding band, and I got more confident on stage. I was able to go out there and just perform and be calm in front of an audience. And that made me a better advocate when I was standing in front of a person in a black robe sitting on an elevated bench. So I was able to communicate more effectively, even around the office. It just made me more confident in any sort of public setting, which makes me more confident in going out and telling people about Nourish House Calls and spreading the good news on podcasts like yours. So I'm grateful for that experience, not just because I got to sing a bunch of cool rock and jazz songs and go to Vegas a few times, but also because it really did build a massively important soft skill that's helping me be more effective in my life today.
Oh, that's cool.
Me
Well, I'm
too.
glad I did ask that question then. So, as we close, what is one small step that someone can do today that is going to help them change their tomorrow?
This is not my idea, but it's an idea I've incorporated. At the end of the day, write down 3 wins from today and write down 3 wins for tomorrow. And this is, Sue, you know this, it's from The Gap and the Gain. Today's 3 wins are all about gratitude. Recognize the good things that came out of today that put you in a good headspace. Going back to what helps you sleep, it's going to put you more into that, parasympathetic rest and digest nervous system response. Is why you don't want to take a cold shower, because you're going to go into fight or flight right away. So that's one benefit. That's the good of writing down today's wins. You write tomorrow's wins before you go to sleep, because lots of times those wins incorporate problems you need to be working on. It's something you're going to solve tomorrow. That's part of the win. And you give your unconscious mind a chance to work on those while you sleep. And you give yourself a real good chance of waking up with an idea you might not have otherwise had of how to solve that problem and knock out that win in a more effective way than you would have if you had not written down tomorrow's wins the night before. So there's my small step. Go write those things down tonight.
Love it. Thanks, Dave. How can people find you?
I always close these interviews by saying, if you like me, you really got to get to know my wife. She's the face of the organization. She's a beautiful genius woman. You can find everything about her and our practice at nourishhousecalls.com. Nourish House Calls on Facebook and Instagram is where we are most active. If you really want to reach me personally, you can email me at dave@nourishhousecalls.com.
Perfect. Well, Dave, thank you for the gift of your time. This was great. I enjoyed our conversation. And yeah, we're going to do
Thanks for
round
having
2.
Me, Sue.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. I value your time with me, and I seek to make every moment count. In order to make lasting change in your life, listening is usually not enough. So I want to ask you, what practical steps are you going to put into action today as a result of listening to this podcast? Remember, any step, any action, no matter how small, starts your journey to a big win. And if you're not sure where to get started, check out my website, personalcoachfinder.com, and find someone who can help. Remember, life doesn't get better by chance, it gets better by choice. Take small steps today and make your life awesome, friends.